Hi, Dia. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, as you're gathering. And we're waiting for Natasha to join us. Good morning for those in the extreme Western Hemisphere who are just waking up. Good evening for those who are on the other side of the planet, preparing for dinner and winding down their days. And good afternoon, mid Ramzan, for all of us in Pakistan, for who it's just after 4 o'clock. No, there's not been a haircut, just showered and squeaky clean for our guest for today, from Natasha. So while we wait for her to sign on, quick introduction. Natasha and I met a few years ago. She had just come back from Princeton and was trying to figure out what she wanted to do here. Natasha is an incredibly gifted writer. She has a power and control over the English vocabulary and the English language like none other I've ever known. It's a truly, truly talented, she's a truly talented human being, writes beautifully. Her thoughts are as lucid and clear. And her mother introduced us. Her mother is Natasha Japanwala, who owns and runs the Origins School. In fact, they are responsible. Their middle school children went with me to Runnycote several years ago. In fact, I think it was either the year Natasha had just arrived or just before. And they are the children who are responsible for triggering our Human Heritage Project, which gave the Fort villagers water wells, tube wells, and electricity, power, and then eventually it grew into a school also and some medical treatment. So it's been an amazing journey, and Natasha has been with us on several tours. The most recent one that she was with us on was when we went to Shigar to stay with Khana Badosh Baitak as invited guests and hosted by Baneen Mirza, who was our guest a couple of sessions ago, and her husband Ahmad, and that was an absolutely magical trip. So so we're waiting for Natasha to come on board, and that gives you a brief idea on who she is and how I've known her. Natasha will be signing in. I think she's probably just woken up. She's in Boston. She's at Harvard doing her master's in education. And I thought that because I have a similar degree from, of course, many decades ago, I have a master's in education from Columbia, as all of you know, from Columbia University, and she's doing a similar one out of Harvard right now. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to bring her on board and get her involved in the conversations that I'm having with the Jugalbandi series with Jean Gardner on Mondays. For those of you who've participated in that, you'll know what the reference is. And for those who don't know, please join us on Monday afternoons to see what Jean has to say. And we're basically going back and forth. So every Monday, Jean Gardner comes in to talk to us about what she and I are discussing in terms of place and identity and culture and our relationship to the earth and the alignment of the human body and the universe and the role that heritage plays in all of this, heritage architecture. Natasha has joined. And in between on Thursdays, we have people who have either been on trips with me, who are somehow surfing around the similar ideas of how do we impart this knowledge, how do we share these ideas, what is the narrative that's going to be reconstructed post-pandemic. So every Thursday we have a different guest, and then our discussions from Thursdays get looked at by Jean, and then she and I talk about it between Thursday and Monday. So it's this wonderful back and forth that's happening between us. Natasha has joined. I'm going to ask her to join us right now, that just in time as I've given the intro to her. Let me see if I can make this work. I have managed to... Here we go. It's this god-awful hour in Boston. Natasha!
Hi. Hi, Zain. I'm still a little groggy.
And still...
but groggy, but utterly delighted. So
how is it you managed to look so dreamy at this god-awful 7 o'clock hour in Boston? I mean...
you should have scheduled your lives, because the thing is, I do wake up on Thursdays usually and Mondays to listen to your live. Like that's my BBC radio hour listen. So I'll wake up, I'll put on Instagram, and then like as I make my coffee, I'll be listening to you. Yeah, so I'm very excited to be a guest on this myself.
So, welcome on board. Good morning. Thank you so much for taking time out. I have just finished an introduction on you, which you missed most of, I think, but I discussed how Link's school, thanks to your mother, started off, triggered my Human Heritage Project. I mentioned that you had come back from Pakistan post Princeton and you're now doing your master's at Harvard. And because you've been on this journey with me over the last few years and we've developed a friendship from this whole process, you know, we did the sugar trip together, you've done Seven and Runnycoat. I've also told everybody that you write beautifully. So I think we're all expecting this fantastic caption at the end of all of this as a review. But I think your introduction is done. There's a lot of people on here who already know you. And actually, you missed it. So a few minutes ago, I was reading the Havelis of Sindh. I'm sorry, it's backward.
Oh.
The Perishing Havelis of Sindh by Kamla Safdwari. And while I'm reading this, and I had my music on, of course, Rumi, your favorite, came and sat on my lap, and I just thought this is perfect. She wanted him to, you know, to recreate this whole scenario in my house. This is
I do love Rumi very much.
Right?
He's definitely, not that I have favorites, but he's definitely my favorite of your cats.
That's not fair. So this is a visual. I also thought I'd go back to sitting where I normally sit because you normally sit in front of me. And this is a visual that you are used to seeing with this backdrop. So I thought, let's try as at home and comfortable as possible.
Yeah, when I bring all my problems to you, and I'm like, Zen, help me. What should I do?
Listen, Natasha, you've been following this crazy, like, organic growth of this community and the content on these live chats, which I had never fathomed would get into this sort of depth. I thought it'd be nice to, you know, get some live chats going for people to do some Q&A with me on what the editor is about, what we represent, the vision, the philosophy, and the direction. But actually, it's becoming much more, much deeper, much more content laden. And of course, having Jean on board to sort of bounce things out of and share her ideas and her vision about sort of her interplanetary vision, so to speak. What do you think is happening with the edutors in terms of our role in education? I know you're studying, you're doing a master's in education. You've been teaching here at school, at Kiran Foundation. So just how do you see the educational value of the edutors along with the adventure and the tourism, the self-discovery, because you've been through some of this with us? What do you think?
So,
Where do you think?
I mean, I think that like there's so many lens through which I can answer that question, right? Like I can answer that question as somebody who's come on your edu tours, right?
Yeah.
I can answer that question as somebody who has taught and has been like, when I was a teacher, I really tried to take my kids on as many trips as possible. And you took the Origins kids on an edu tour. I mean, that was when I first heard of you, when you first made your debut in my life. So I think quite simply, it's what you're doing with Cube is you're not taking students and citizens, you take grown-ups as well, more so often than students on these trips. It's more than just like, oh, let's go on a trip, let's bond. What you're trying to do is very actually curriculum driven, even if you don't necessarily have a set curriculum.
Right.
Right? Like what you're doing is you're trying to get people to connect to very particular heritage sites with a history that have a story to tell. And you're curating these experiences that allow for these deep conversations to happen that uses the heritage site as a launching pad for all these other questions that are so important. And I think the reason why Cube is so special is not just because of your personality and all the things that you know and the way that you drive these conversations, but I think one thing I've realized on so many trips is people are just so thankful to have a platform through which to have these conversations that we don't usually have, in places that we don't usually go to. And I think to draw it all back to schools, it's so important for kids to not just, be going on these trips, but it's so important for them to be having these conversations. And the traditional curriculum in schools doesn't allow for that.
This is really interesting. There's two things. I'm listening to you, and the words that I want to pick up, like Jean does with me, I'm going to do with you, is I think what I'd love to discuss with you, just one-on-one, whether anybody else is really here or not. It's lucky that we have an audience. But really, I was just wondering, we haven't chatted about this in ages. I really wonder now that where you're at, and you're looking back at all the work you've done in Pakistan and your experience, your edutors, and the stuff that I talk about. But I'm no deep in it. You have the luxury and the opportunity to sit so far away in different time zones and look at the work that's happening here. What in your mind should we now be identifying as the term curriculum? And what about the a new post-pandemic narrative on what education might end up becoming? So these are my two.
So
What
I
is
think
curriculum
one
now?
of the more,
No, go ahead.
yeah. So I think so there are two ways, or two super helpful phrases that I like to use when I think about curriculum now, right? The first is living curriculum, right? And living curriculum is when the curriculum is open to change, and the teacher or the facilitator or the leader of the classroom sets a general journey or a general map for the course, but really allows the curriculum to adapt and develop in response to what happens in each classroom session.
Right. So
right. Sorry, you're breaking up a bit.
Organic and fluid.
Exactly. And also, right, like when you think okay, let's do a living curriculum, you kind of wonder why is this not the standard, right? Because every time somebody responds to something, that's a question being asked, that's a curiosity arising, and it's criminal not to follow that, right? It's criminal to say, yeah, okay, let's just bury all of this and move to the next topic that was laid down by God knows who, right? The other phrase which connects to living curriculum is learner-driven or student-centric, whichever phrase you want to use, learning. And what that is really using the students' interests and responses to drive what you end up learning. Oh yeah, sorry, I lost you. Okay, yeah, I can hear you again.
Finally, we're back. Sorry about that.
No worries. Okay, yes. What were you saying? What was I saying, rather? Where did I cut off? So basically, learner-driven / student-centric learning is when the teacher uses the student interests to guide the curriculum. So I gave an example, but I might have cut off, so I'll just give it again. Like if you're doing a tour and you have someone coming along who's really interested in music, then you'd curate a live music session, or you'd make the history of that region's musical development part of the tour. And those two things, right, like living curriculum and student-centric learning, or another way to put it is like it could be a constructivist approach. Like there are many different terms to give it, but the idea is that you use the students' interests to guide the way you design the learning experience. And I think that to answer your second question, which is like what's going to happen post-pandemic, the status quo is too strong. Like as much as we understand and think about student-centric learning and autonomous learning, right, which is something that I really feel should be happening more of in the pandemic, like as schools have gone virtual overnight, rather than stick to the curriculum that already exists and try desperately to catch up and fail, teachers should just use this time ideally as this like gorgeous imaginative blessing, and play around with what students can do, and instead of keeping students online and having classes online, designing experiences that set students free, that allow them to use this time in a studio style to answer questions, develop projects, make art, to really be autonomous, to really figure out what they're interested in, and create work that responds to that interest. However, I understand why there's this competing need to play catch up, because schools are held to standardized assessments, right? Schools are held to external curricula. And the minute you start giving students autonomy, you lose the time to follow these like very sort of mandated, strict benchmarks in curricula that exist. So where is the pandemic going to go? I mean, I think it's raised a lot of really important questions, and we've had this discussion about what learning should look like. But ultimately, as kids fall behind and as the equity gap widens, as soon as schools reopen physically, the need to catch up is going to eclipse the need to experiment. That's my assessment of the situation anyway. Depressing, but true.
So that's really interesting, because I think that there's going to be a hybrid condition as part of a transition. I agree with you that the establishment is so fraught in its old school ways. You said earlier, we don't know where we've inherited this. We know exactly where we've inherited this from, in fact. It is our subject-oriented, colonial, one-way learning teaching process, because they knew what product they wanted out of the end result. They therefore did not create any thinkers, philosophers, and analytics. No critical thinking was encouraged, and therefore our curriculum sits the way it does. And when I say ours, I don't actually mean just ours in Pakistan. It's the same in the UK. It's the same pretty much in the US. There's only a few programs across the world, like the IB, that allows you to do any like student-driven, student-centric thought process. So I think that now that teachers under this pandemic condition are having to rethink how they share this, and the mass standardized testing is being pushed aside because you cannot get 100 kids in a room. So the student mindset is also, I believe, changing, because today's student is very screen oriented, very much smartphone and computer and this kind of digital space oriented, where for them it's actually arduous to sit in all of these other kids, and sometimes they get bored and it's a waste of time. I mean, you and I understand it's great for them to share and to be socialized, but for them this might be a space that's actually more comforting. And I think our educational system will go through a split personality time frame, where it's going to go back to the establishment because it's been there for millennia globally, and also try and keep this going, because I'm not sure that this pandemic is going to come out in a clean line where they'll suddenly one day say, everybody all go back to school. I think it's going to be, there will be a chunk of time where it'll be gray areas, and they will have to play both games at the same time.
Right. And I think ideally and at best, sorry, I want to quick point out something you said. I mean, ideally what this will do, I think, like, obviously the drivers of education systems worldwide are teachers, right? So if teachers are shaken up in their understanding of what teaching and learning is, and they start doing some things differently because they realize how independent students have the capacity to be, then I think that's a big step. I think that's great worldwide professional development, frankly, that happened in one fell swoop. But I would like to push back a little bit on what you said about, like, social media is students' natural realm. It is, but is it healthy, right? Like, is the way they inhabit and interact on social media healthy? Probably not. And so, okay, how can we use that? The idea that they're passively rather than actively spending so much time online. You know, how can we leverage that piece but make it creative and active? I don't know. I think there's that's a question of instructional design. It coming back to just like the fact that teachers more or less, and can't blame them, they had to do this overnight, are like copy pasting their classes online. That's not how it should be happening. It's a completely different medium with completely different possibilities. And where can we, yeah, I wish there was like a repository of like really awesome projects teachers are doing with their kids online as a way to illustrate what truly imaginative online learning that's disruptive can look like, because there aren't too many examples of that yet.
Yeah, so this is interesting, right? So the term disruptive is going to play, I think, a huge role in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think that we don't have precedents, right? We don't have, like you said, we don't have a repository of things to go back to and say this worked and this didn't work. But from now, 6 months later, we may have a few of those and saying, okay, this worked and this doesn't work. And also, I mean, I think that, yes, social media has not been used productively by this generation who were born into it. But I think that at least I see in terms of the teachers that I know and the students who are stuck, quote unquote, at home studying, that actually suddenly the value of the smartphone and their screen has shifted from pure entertainment and escape and waste of time and self-indulgence to actually a usable mechanism that will help them learn in a language we're familiar with, which, you know, old school folks like myself are having to learn and engage. But for them, it comes very intuitively, very, very naturally. So I think that shift is happening. And the post-pandemic, I think the pedagogical restructuring of education as a sharing learning tool versus foie gras, versus just shoving all this stuff down the throats to sit back, right? I mean, I think that's going to go through some turbulence and positive turbulence, turbulence.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that constructive turbulence, right? Like that's so needed. But you know, like to think again about like the way that you run a cube tour, right? Like there's so many elements of that if you could, like, I don't know, like what would you put? It's such an interesting thought experiment. If you had to write a manual for teachers in the classroom based off of what you've learned doing cube tours.
Yeah, that would be crazy. Of course, no one would read it, but other than that,
I would read it. I think that would actually be a really interesting thing to read.
You'd probably maybe have one audience. So, you know, the Cube editors, remember, they came out of this need for people who have questions to take them to the source of the answers and get them to touch the source and start engaging in those what seem like imaginary questions and what seem like irrelevant and ephemeral and sort of whimsical questions. But, you know, I took them to the source and said, look, here is the channel from which your answers will come. And it's a physical thing. It's not just a weird like idea in your head. These are realities. These are real trade routes. These are real buildings. These are real cultural exchanges. There was real economics involved in this. You know, there was real love lost and bloodshed and change, sharing of engineering ideas, etc., etc. It's all real.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think so that was the purpose of this, because I realized that the educational system is what you'd said. You know, it's very stoic and, you know, very rote fashion, one-way ticket. And here it was giving people an opportunity to actually self-reflect and ask the questions that they actually didn't have the skill set to ask at school. So now when I look back at it, I think that the preciousness of those tours is actually, I'm thinking, will probably get elevated, because now that we go out, we're not going to take going out for granted.
Yeah.
So when any place, in a group, in a location which is potentially remote and unknown, like most of the places I take people to, and it's all curated, right? So you went on a trip that was curated. We've just done this phenomenal Bahawalpur trip with a whole different group of people. The third trip in October was a completely different group. And so every trip is curated. So that curation is going to have to be turned into some kind of a modular architectonic by me, so that it still has a pedagogical framework, right? It can't just be do as you please when the time comes, depending who comes. It's still got to fit within some boundaries, and have those boundaries be flexible and fluid, so it maintains its amorphousness, but still has something that one can come back to and say, okay, let's build on this, let's fix it. Here's how it'll evolve in the next 2 years or 3 years. And it may keep responding to the changes in post-pandemic life.
Yeah.
Right? Because we don't know. We really don't know today what will happen in 6 months. All of my editorial plans that have been made have all been shelved.
Yeah.
But it's amazing time to have these conversations, for me to use every other contributing person, participant, people who've been on tours with me to say, okay, where do you think we can go with this? And develop a curriculum. I mean, this is kind of what we're doing. We're talking about it, we're questioning it, we're critiquing it.
Yeah.
And going to extract content from it that we can then create that manual that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And obviously,
right, and equally, like perhaps you don't need a curriculum. Like you've been doing it just, I mean, the only reason I think you'd need a curriculum is if you want to scale and you want someone other than you to run these tours, because you have such a like sort of organic, and we keep using that word, way of doing this, right? Such a way of leading these conversations, drawing different threads together. That's rare, right? And that drives this just as much as any curriculum would. But there's another piece to the Cube tours, in addition to sort of the physical monument that you visit that has all the answers, and it's the connection piece, right? Like on every trip that I've gone on with you, I've had the opportunity to meet brilliant people I wouldn't otherwise have met, and develop friendships I wouldn't otherwise have developed. Like I can think off the top of my head of tons of people that I would never have known if it hadn't been for going on a Cube tour. So it also plays a really important role, as travel does, in bringing people together who would not otherwise have met, and forcing them to spend a concentrated amount of intimate time together.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, I hadn't planned it, but I talk about a community being developed, and there is a community of edu-tourists that are being developed, and they have started defining their own profile, defining their own MO, almost defining their own SOPs beyond my code of conduct and dress code. It's really amazing to see the people that are coming together and the people that are bringing more into the fold. There is a family that's growing, and they're all like-minded people that, for me, originally it was just a fishing net that I threw out in the big ocean, and I didn't know who would respond, and whether it would all be teenagers or whether it would all be architecture students from universities. I had no idea, and there really are, from all sorts of places, really amazing people who've come on these trips, and they've given so much to each of those tours. So I kind of like trigger some part of it, but we all, including myself, come back. We take away so much from these trips, from each other in the group, which there's no way of planning and no way of, expecting or projecting what that outcome will be. It's pretty magical.
And that's a component that I have seen often, definitely in my own schooling, missing from classrooms, where each individual is treated as someone with the potential to transform you and your perspective, right? Because we think of students in a classroom as this like monolith that need to be fed content, but really they're these brilliant, curious, bursting individuals. And what if every day that we were in a classroom, we treated kids the way that we treat each other on a Cube tour, with like curiosity and warmth and an eagerness to learn about their lives.
It's quite amazing because, with Jean, we've been talking about place, and with Benin, we had this elaborate discussion about, the Khana Badosh idea and identity and movement. And you and I were both in Shigar with Benin and Ahmed together.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. We come back with these very tangible experiences. But if I was to sit down and say, okay, how do I structure it? I have reservations with that word, because even though these have been real tangible experiences we've all come back with, and we've all been moved at a very emotive, sometimes even spiritual level. And many people have come back and they sort of look at life differently without any such thing being on the agenda or on the plan of that trip. If you remember, my charcoal drawings that we do at Runnycourt Fort, we did the figure. I was looking at those pictures. These amazing drawings that went half from drawings into language. You started writing on your sketches because you got so frustrated with the drawing process. And I said, I said, go for it, write. It's another form of drawing, right? I'm not interested in replicas of of that building. I was interested in how you were going to express your feeling about it, and you both did. So does one really want to structure that? You know, I've had people come back from those trips, Natasha, from the drawing and said, that was an amazing 45 minutes and may have been the best 45 minutes of the whole trip because it made me slow down, think about who I am, what I'm doing, my relationship with these spaces, with these ancient monuments. I never thought that it would be a meditative process. And then at Runnycoat, we started doing the forced meditation before you get into the building, right? I stopped the vans at the front and make people sit down silently, feel the earth, enjoy the heat and the grit, turn their phones off. Luckily, there's no signals. Most people's phones don't work. And then we walk through the sun gate in silence. So little gestures of how to rethink approach and rethink what one takes home, what one takes away. You know, it's a, and then one wonders, okay, so you're saying, why don't you put it into a manual? So how would I use that manual in two places, for instance? There's a corporate structure, there's a corporate industry, and then there's the educational industry. And then there's the general tourist, the adult who goes with me, right? So I have these, not two, but I'm sorry, three places that I've got to.
I mean, it's a question for you of whether you want to scale this, right? Because if you want to scale it, you'll lose its magic.
This is my fear.
And you know, I almost think that, like, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't even try. Like, just keep doing it the way you're doing it, because that's the magic of it. That's the theatrics of it. That's the connective element of it. You know, but I think that you should write more about, definitely, maybe manual was definitely the wrong word, but you should write more in terms of reflecting on what this experience has taught you about education, about connection, about travel. Because by bringing all these different elements and strands together, you've created something quite unique, actually, and interdisciplinary in nature, right? Like, it's not a travel company, it's not an education company, it's not, you know, it's all those things.
What is it? You said travel company in your Instagram post.
That's true.
What does she mean by travel company? I was like, God, if I know, she's the one who knows language.
Because then that would have taken me such a long time to figure it out, what to say. And then at least this way, I was like, we'll attract a travel audience, you know. So, you know, but that's it. Like, you can call it whatever you want to call it in order to speak to whichever audience you want to speak to, and then grab them and shake them up completely.
You know, so on our on the group who's joined us today, Sarah has joined us, and Sarah works at Habib Bank. And this year we did my first, talking of scaling up, massive group. There was 55 people who went in the blistering cold for an overnight stay at Runnycoat with me as an editor, but also much more so for their own team building. And, you know, I don't think I've been as nervous about taking such a large group, B, a group of people who are potentially not really interested in history necessarily, and the kind of information that I take. I've been lucky that people that sign up with me already have a penchant for being history nerds, and they're interested in these things. It was such an incredible experience. You know, once we got past that initial 20 minutes sitting outside the fort, where I just said, you know, do me a favor and do yourselves a favor and just let go of your vanity, let go of the baggage we carry with us, of the brands and the technology and the scheduling fears. And, you know, we carry so many urban fears with us, like this urban monsters that we take, just like urban vampires that we carry with us, and are sucking our souls out of us all day because we live in a city.
Yeah.
Just for a few hours, you know, while you're with me, just let it go. I promise you'll survive and you'll do fine. And, you know, their attitude changed. Suddenly, these people who were not sure of me and I wasn't sure of them, you know, we made some incredible connections. There was no complaints. I mean, I knew there was several things that went not quite right, as I would like them to in my quest for perfection. But it was the most magical. So, you know, that can happen. Now,
yeah,
about a scale, and we had a great time. Nobody fell sick. Nobody died. They enjoyed everything. We made some great friends together between themselves and between me and them. Who would have thought I'd have bankers for friends? But, you know, I do now. And I love that. So, and they were from Lahore and Islam. So I'm actually still in touch with these people, and it's been amazing. Um, but in terms of scaling up, right? So as long as it's one group who's with me, and they get to share my spirit and my passion and my emotional, like you said, theatrics. Like, so theatrics is kind of like, it's a falsity. Mine's not theatric in that sense. I'm not making it up. There's a genuine love for these things that's not coming from it.
But theatrics, not in the sense of performance, but in the sense of walking people through a story.
Right. The story.
Right?
Just,
like following a narrative, which
yeah.
I definitely feel when I'm on a cube tour. Like, it's set up for me. The experience and the way the experience is told is set up for me in a way that really gives me a chance to grasp its magnitude. And I really feel that at Muckley, right? So there is a theatrical element to it, right? When you're like, okay, let's walk through 14 centuries or however many centuries of history. Right, sorry. But you started the 14th century, right? Like, yeah. You started the 14th century. You walked through 4 centuries of history. Sorry. I was like, yeah, 14 is a lot. But that's a show for me in a sense. And like, it just goes to show how the word show and the word theatrics have been muddied over time. But I did feel like, okay, there's a story here, and it's like the curtains opening. And it's going to play out for me. And you allow, in the way that you move through space alone, you allow for that experience, which I think is really important. Because typically when you go to Muckley, you start at, like, the Isa Khan and the two big ones.
The big ones.
Yeah, and then you're like, yeah, this is it. Like, the most beautiful ones are really sort of more towards the edge and towards the end. And you begin there and you work your way up. And in doing that, you realize that by the time you get to the big, flashy monuments that are really sort of the stars, you realize that they're actually quite not the exciting ones at all. And the really beautiful ones are the simple stone ones that allow light to move over the course of the day, and these shadows, and there's this gorgeous geometric simplicity to it. And that's something you use the same tactic when we were in Shigar, which I thought was beautifully, going back to the word structure. This is what I mean when I say structure. I don't mean like, oh, let's follow a mandated curriculum. I mean, let's find a way to tell a story that resonates.
Right.
Or let's find a way to organize things so that they have impact. And that is magical artistic work.
So it's the curation, really. It's the curation.
Right.
I've had others. Sarah Baig is on here. She's this a friend of mine who's also triggered the Habib Bank trip. It was her idea that we do this, and I think it was pretty successful. People who've been with me on that week-long trip through Sakkar and Mohenjo-daro and Khairpur, a couple of times they said, we didn't expect this to come next. And I think that the curation plays a huge role in how I set, like what you build up. So, Natasha, I think now we've come to another point, which is language, right? I really, like, you remember when you did Sevan with me and Ranikote, and then we did Shigar, you've done Muckley, that I realized that to throw people into any of this is like throwing them into the deep end. And it's unfair to expect anybody to take away from it anything beyond shock, right? I think my curation is developed over time to gradually build the semantics, to get people to understand the language, whether it's the color or the stone or the geology, and understanding the language of these buildings and the language of their history, where they're coming from. So that you don't end up being, like I've said before, this bull in a china shop, where you look at this very delicate, very fragile, very gently created set of monuments over 400 years at Muckley. And I will use these terms that make one think that I'm describing fragile pieces of crystal chandeliers. But I see this stretch of Muckley as being that delicate and that poetic. So it would be terrible of me, I think, if I didn't gradually assimilate my travelers into the semantics of this language, which I don't know if you agree or not agree, but I try that in all of these places. So I'm hoping that you may think that makes sense for Muckley, for Ranikote, for Sevan, for Shigar. So everything is built up gradually. So nobody suffers any shock, and the absorption is deeper. That's the idea.
Absolutely, and it's sort of like really all of it. I mean, I'm talking particularly about Makli and Shigar. Both those strips were engineered, again, not to use a clunky, word here that is actually quite against the texture of what we're trying, the feel we're trying to go for. But like, they're all built so that you, in the end, realize that what the starry monument is like, they're all built to kind of make you like realize like, okay, the star of the show is not the star of the show.
Right.
Like, I'll never forget going to Shigar Fort with you and being like, this is beautiful, but I like the small kankas and muallas much better. Those small, dusty ones that you would have just passed by without even realizing what they were. I think one of the most transformative experience of my time at Shigar, the two things that we saw was that kanka with the sort of wide posts in front, and we went inside and, it was empty and we sat there. I mean, compared to Shigar Fort, it was very, very humble. But there was something about being there. And this is, I think, what you mean when you say semantics. There was something about being there in that room, the story you told, just the feel that you were able to elicit. That was just beautiful. The same thing happened at Amburek Masjid, which was, again, this again, look at us, we're swooning over it. And like, yeah, it was this small masjid. I mean, thankfully, it was this unbelievably misty afternoon.
Remember the smell of the wood?
The smell of the wood. Like, again, look at us going nuts over it. And like, Shigar Fort is like, yeah, whatever. Even though Shigar Fort is what people go to Shigar for, and probably very few people go see Amburek and that kanka, whose name I don't even remember, but it's those things that really stick out to me. And that's what, that's what it's all about is, and I don't know how you do it. It's this unbelievable magic of like, look at this. And it's through telling the story of it, but it's something else that I can't quite put my finger on. I don't know what it is that you do in these small places. Another one is that like, those 4 posts in Makli, and you were like, the geometry of the light, and I was like, like, yeah, but I don't know how you do it, but you do it.
Those 4 corners at Makli is that one lonesome building that nobody takes ownership of. It's the most modern structure. It looks like Louis Kahn has made it. And as the sun shifts, those corners, I mean, for me, I can hear music through that light coming through those corners, and it illuminates the stone. You can see it going from white to yellow to orange, and the building starts coming alive. And it's, for me, it would be such a disservice to not share that with you. And even you remember it now. Of all we've looked at 80 monuments in Makli, and so many of them are these muscular, steroided, big, obvious buildings. But it's that one that is so poetic and so often forgotten that actually sticks in our memory, even today as we're speaking about it. And you went to Makli with me 5 years ago?
No, it was it was 2 years ago then. It was fairly recent. It was fairly recent. Yeah.
It was still 2 years ago, right? It wasn't like 3 months back. So,
but again, like even right now, it's the way you tell a story, right? It's the words you use that make a huge, huge difference. Like, I mean, there are a million ways to frame a monument like that, but just, just the way you said it, you're like, as the light moved, I could hear the music. Like you by using language, you're able to tell a story that we cannot see. And once we see that through your words, we never forget it.
One hopes.
One hopes.
So, the funny thing is that my other dilemma that I want to discuss with you, we've just come back from a phenomenal trip. Masi Bina is here, Bina Munir, who's just mentioned the Bahawalpur trip, and that's triggered it.
I am itching to go to Bahawalpur with you. I was just thinking that when you were like, we've done Shigar, we've done Makli, I'm like, Bahawalpur is next.
Next, Sarah wants to go to Bahawalpur. We've talked about this. Saira, who was with us on the Bahawalpur trip. So one of the things that I want your help in trying to figure out how to manage the timelines, right? I go from 4,000-year-old Mohenjo-daro to 200-year-old Talpur tombs in Hyderabad, or 150-year-old palaces in Bahawalpur. The palaces in Bahawalpur are out of a fairy tale. They're like walking through pages of the Arabian Nights. It's just, oh my God, I missed you on that trip so much. You would have just loved it. And we came back from this magical trip. There's Masibina saying it was the best. And then we do crazy things like the Rawat Fort, right? It has 3 floors needed. They're all collapsing. And yet, where does Zain Mustafa want to do his maps and comparative analysis of forts in the region? On the top of the fort's wall, 40 meters up in the air, with a terrible climb. Masi's shoes got broken, but no, I had to go. And we had a guy on a bike bring our chairs, tables, and my big board. This huge palava was done because I wanted to get there and get these people to feel the mass, the expanse, the muscularity of the history of that building. And you can't do that if you just sit on the side in the comfortable air-conditioned room and you look at it from a distance. Then you may as well stay at home and watch a movie. So that climb up and down gets you to build a physical relationship with these buildings. Same at Ranikote. I tell everybody Ranikote is difficult. You must climb that wall with me to get a sense of the magnificence of this piece.
Yeah. And and again, like Ranikote is another great narrative theatrical experience with you, because you approach it, you climb it, you see it from different angles, and the entire point about Ranikote is the genius, right, of the fact that this, and just like how they communicated with each other along all those posts. It's stunning, but you can't possibly understand that, as you said, by standing on the ground. And to answer your question about, like, how do you go from 1,000 years to 400 years to 250 years? I mean, that precisely is the scale and beauty of our history. So they should go together, because it's the story of how we came to be is not always linear. Although, I mean, of course, it occurred chronologically, but I think sometimes when you bring the sort of the fairy tale like Bahawalpur palaces together, not that I've been to them, and the muscularity, as you said, of the Derawar fort together, the contrast is part of what makes it also fascinating, right? That, like, side by side, not too far from each other, these vastly different monuments exist, and the architecture tells a story of the people who built it and of the time in which they emerged. And how fascinating that we have reached a moment in history where we can see these eras stand by each other side by side in a way that they never could have in real time. That to me is real. Like, that to me is just unreal. Like, and what are the ways in which they speak to each other, and what are the ways in which they gave rise to each other?
No, and so it's also funny. Then I look at all of what I do from the lens of the tourism industry, and I wish I could scale up, or I wish there was some way of replicating what we do so that more people had access to this kind of a discussion about these places. We have so many people who will get to these locations, they'll take these phenomenal photos, and they'll come away with just a picture of its skin and no in gut, like, deep understanding of all of this that you've just discussed. And
Yeah.
pains me so much. I wish all of these people could go with me, and I could train all of, share all this knowledge with all of them and say, here, take this. Because I'm not able to be at all the forts in Pakistan at the same time and all the palaces at the same time. I mean, Takht Bahi, Taxila, oof, it's mind-blowing history. And like, I've had friends saying, why don't you come in on your next holiday, come and visit us? It's like, no, you come here. There's so phenomenal history, architectural history. I'm not going anywhere. You come here. So listen, while we have 2 minutes left, where are we going next? Where am I taking you next when you come back with this fancy degree of yours from Harvard?
Bahawalpur. I want to go to Bahawalpur.
You just missed the Bahawalpur trip. So Bahawalpur.
No, we can go again. So I have a few things on my list. I really want to go to Bahawalpur with you. I really want to go to Chitral also with you.
So Chitral, we can do this summer in case you're back. I'm not sure if the polo will happen or not, but Chitral, I've been itching to go back. Recently I shared the story about my first Chitral trip through the Lowari Tunnel, and it's just been playing on my mind. It's a very strange Kulava, you start itching to just go back to it. It's a very strange magnetism that the mountains have for somebody who already been. The minute you've been once, it is addictive. There's no way you cannot.
It really, really, really is. Like, I remember Shigar was the first time in my life actually that I'd been up north, and then last summer I'd gone to Hunza, to Benin's fabulous new Khana Badosh iteration. Stunning. And and I took a page out of your book. I did a writing retreat up there. So it was different. It was obviously not what you do, but it was inspired by, you taking people up north. And so I was actually really hoping to do another writing retreat this summer. And obviously now I think travel is just tough. I don't know when we'll be able to resume that kind of movement, especially now that I'm in Boston. So for me to figure out now how to, in the middle of a pandemic, make my way to Hunza is a bit of a stretch. But 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 yeah, like I kind of just am so I miss all these trips so much that I feel like, when I come home, we should just do like a road trip right through the country and stop at all the places.
We can. So there's a friend of mine who is heading out to Islamabad. They're driving to Islamabad, and we were discussing from Karachi to Islamabad, and we were discussing just the other day the places that they can stop. So they have a 10-year-old son, and there's a husband, wife, and a driver. So I said, here's how you can do it, and it's kind of what you just said, right? So Aisha and I did the train journey from here to Islamabad, and then we met the others in Chitral by flight. But
I mean, that's somewhere else I'd love to go real quick. Would love to go to Peshawar. I've never been, believe it or not.
we did Peshawar last summer. It was so rich. It's so rich, so beautiful, so much history, just spectacular. In fact, triggered by Jean's discussion about place the other day on Monday, I did 2 posts today, and I've just had such a hard time pulling out 10 images and 10 images to discuss the different types of places we've been to and the different types of emotional and spiritual reactions that you have to these places. So one of those pictures was Peshawar, and it was so difficult to pick one picture from Peshawar when there were so many. And it's I mean, I have to also figure out that if travel in groups is going to be a problem, what happens if only I go? Can I do enough live video work and live chats for groups, or can the edutour go online so that I go out there? You won't be able to touch the things, but I can still walk you through the same process. The narrative can still be done the same way. I've got to also think about this option. I mean, how long are we going to sit here and just be bottled up, right?
Yeah.
So you may not be the only one stuck in Boston, not able to get to Hunza, but if travel allows us in small groups to go, right now they're allowing a driver plus one or small families.
Yeah.
I might create my bridging process to say, okay, I'll go. And I'll go to, if there's a group of 10 people who want to go to Chitral, I'll go to Chitral and I'll show you all of those things with the camera live. And maybe that's something that one can work on. I'm not sure, but I think even in my mind, this very tangible thing is going to also have to have some kind of an iteration in the digital space, unfortunately.
I mean, I think it's tough because so much of what you do is physical and real, but equally, what you have to share in terms of, what can definitely be, shared digitally. But it's an interesting one. But Zen, I also feel that the minute all of this is over, everybody's going to be so hungry to be out in the world again that you will be inundated, I think.
Funny to say that we were at dinner. Masibina and I were at dinner yesterday. It's the first time I've stepped out of the house all along. And Uncle Zafar Tapal's house. And he said the same thing. He said, Zen, as soon as this pandemic loosens up, even if it's not 100%, even if it gives you 25, 30% of freedom of movement, he says so many people are not going to be doing international travel that you're going to be inundated with this profile of person who's interested in this. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. But then, replicate myself, it'll become difficult. And it's exhausting. Natasha, you've been on these trips. They're exhausting for me because
I remember in Shigar, you felt sick.
I was unwell in Shigar. I had a fever. And we still managed to make it work. Remember, I was all bundled up when we were at the fort. Luckily, the nice things we'd done, and we were just left with the Shigar fort at the end, which suddenly lost all its luster. Poor thing.
Zen Mustafa destroying the country's greatest monuments, one after the other.
Facing their greatness with other greatness. His own version.
I agree.
Listen, Natasha, I think we're time. I don't want Instagram to cut us off, but it's almost 4. So I'm going to, sorry, it's almost 5.
It is almost 5.
They're giving permission to let me sign off.
But
thank
this
you so much.
Was so wonderful. It was so wonderful talking to you. I missed you. I missed Cube Tours. Looking forward to seeing you again in person, although we chat often in the meantime.
I missed you, and my misses you, everybody, including Sajad and the iced coffee. So
Oh, I
I
do
really,
miss Sajad's iced coffee so much. No one can make iced coffee like Sajad can.
I tried it and I failed. So anyway, on that note, have a great day. Abby, nice to see you from Paris. Tanya Khala, nice to see you from Bangladesh. So wonderful, this community, this international community that we've developed. It makes me so happy to see expats and others signing in everywhere, all the way from Melbourne to New York, and thanks to you in Boston. It's just been an amazing journey right here, right now. So, thank you all, Natasha. Thank you. God bless you. Stay safe. Stay under lockdown quarantine for everybody who's in Pakistan, please, and look after yourselves. Khudafis from me till G. Gardner. Thank you so much. Bye. Take care.
Right.
Khudafis.